All right, it says we're live. That means I guess we're live. And I guess I'm Brent Leary. No, I know I'm Brent Leary. I'm pretty confident in that. I'm also confident that it is a great day here in Atlanta Metro. And, I'm feeling kind of good because, I'm a big Rams fan for anybody who knows anything about me. And I feel pretty confident that the Rams did pretty good in the draft. I'm actually feeling really positive about the upcoming football season. So I'm happy. I'm very excited. Also very excited about who I'm going to be talking to and about what we're going to be talking about in the next couple of minutes or so. So before I bring out my guests, I'm part of PPN Players Production Networks. We got stuff, we got shows, we got things that are going on after this one actually. So right after this show, this is cool. I'm doing the CRM players, of course, with the venerable Paul Greenberg. And venerable is probably a good word for this show because at 3 o'clock during our regular show, how many of you out there ever use Goldmine or even Act? I see my guest is raising his hand in the green room. It's hard to believe those two contact management systems were both started, I believe, in 1989. And 2024 minus 1989 is 35. So we're talking 35 years since the beginning, pretty much so, of the CRM industry. Because you could kind of, contact management grew into CRM and on-prem CRM, and then on-prem CRM turned into the cloud stuff and all the different kind of mutations. We got industry specific stuff. We got stuff that's focused just on sales and service and marketing. And of course, the suites and the platforms and the ecosystem. Now we got AI. 35 years ago, that pretty much started with Act and Goldmine. And one of the people that were there at the beginning will be our guest at 3 o'clock today, John Ferrara. I like to call him the Right Reverend John Ferrara because if you've ever talked to John, you feel like you've just walked away from a Sunday morning sermon if you've ever talked to him. And we want to bring him on and just let him kind of go unleashed because we want to hear, his thoughts on what it was like at the beginning, but also really to hear his thoughts on where we are today. And did he expect what they were doing back then, 35 years ago, to lead to what we're doing today and what we may be doing in the future? So if you can join us 3 p.m. later today, John Ferrara. It's like he's like the Godfather of contact management. My buddy Paul Greenberg, we call him the Godfather of CRM. I'm surrounded by Godfathers today. It's pretty interesting. So join us if you can for that. Also next week, me and the venerable Paul Greenberg, we're hitting the road. We're going to be at the early part of the week. We're going to be in Vegas. Yeah, I know. Vegas. Vegas for a good reason. We're going to be at ServiceNow's conference, Knowledge 24. We're going to record a bunch of episodes. We got some really great guests lined up. They even given us the use of a studio. So we're really looking forward to that. And then at the end of the next week, we are going from Vegas to Miami for Creatio's No Code Day event. So we will be there on the 9th and 10th, and that should be fun. And we're looking forward to it. I just want to go to Miami, to be honest. But Creatio is a great group of people too, and looking forward to seeing what they have going on. All right, I think that's it. Do I have anything else? Oh yeah, quick watch party next week too. We're doing a watch party for the ServiceNow keynote, and we are combining with the Crunch's Rebecca Wetterman and the CRM Players. So it's a Players Crunch watch party for the main keynote at Knowledge 24. I think that's all I got. Okay, now for today. So I was just, perusing LinkedIn last week. Yeah, just checking out some stuff. I always like to see what's going on, who's talking about what, what kind of conversations get started, spun up. So as I was doing that, this one post just kind of stuck to me. And it was based on the opening line quote from this post. And this is what it was. I am now personally more convinced than ever that application developers writing code to build enterprise application software is fast coming to its end. And that the exclamation point was part of that. It's a pretty emphatic statement. It just made me think. It's like, wow, we're going to do a show about 35 years since CRM, and now we're talking about application developers basically going extinct. So that caught my attention, but it wasn't just that statement that caught my attention. It was who said it. This is who said it. I told you about the Godfather stuff. So this is the Godfather of RPA. This is Francis Carden. I met him when he was a VP of automation at Pega, but before that, Pega had bought his company OpenSpan. So this guy has literally been doing automation since, like, I don't know, probably since around Context Act and Goldmine started. I don't know. But it wasn't just what was said, it was who said it that really piqued my interest. So much so. I know this is a big lead up here, Francis. I'm getting there. It was such a interesting statement, and there was a lot of interaction on that post on LinkedIn. But yesterday, when we did the Players First Great Debate Show, we had these 4 analysts come on. We gave them 3 topics to talk about and debate and discuss. Well, guess what one of those topics ended up being? It ended up being, is Francis right? Are we getting to the end of enterprise application developers? Has AI and automation and all this stuff, is it gonna make these folks kind of go the way of the dodo bird? So we use that as our first topic of discussion for yesterday's show. So I'm gonna play a little clip of what they had to say, and then we're gonna get into it with our guest. So here is the clip, getting some interesting feedback on whether enterprise application developers are going to go away or not.
RPA, where we were going, think of how that influenced but did not take away the assembly line. Programmers and developers are the assembly line workers of the knowledge universe, right? We're just evolving. They're getting more tools to be faster and more efficient and ideally better quality. But right now, what we're seeing from AI, that's super arguable right now. It's not like there's no humans in an auto plant right now. There's not a single person that is responsible for getting a Tesla off the line or a Chevy or whatever, right? No, not at all. So
trying to wipe those people out, though, but that's more of a labor dispute.
I mean, listen, instant coffee didn't kill coffee. Back in the day when instant coffee was first developed, everyone was like, the headlines for that were, you're never going to have to grind a coffee.
We're watching the headlines.
Again. Websites were going to kill paper. No one was ever going to print on a piece of paper ever again, throw out all the machines. We're right back to it with the same weird wonder as if we've never seen this before.
All right, what a buildup. There's some good arguments, some good discussion, some consternation in there. But I think the consensus was that at least those 4 folks may not necessarily agree with Francis. So it is my duty and my honor, my privilege, actually, to bring Francis on to discuss this topic a little further. As I mentioned, I met him at Pega. He was the CEO and founder of OpenSpan. He is now the CEO and founder of Automation Den, and he's still the Godfather of RPA. Francis Carden, thank you for joining me, man.
Hey, Brent, what an opening. I don't know where to start.
You know what? You're responsible for my rants. Because as soon as I saw it, I said, wow, that's interesting. And he's very strong about it. Those exclamation points really talked about the strength. So I wanted to pose it to the group, and they came back with a bit of a different take on it. But what drove you to even make that kind of a statement? What's behind that?
So you have to kind of look back, and funnily enough, I started my first automation company in 1988, and I was a user of Act and Goldmine and other tools. And so that would be interesting with John as well. So maybe we can get together. The trouble with us old folks is that we go back and we look at history of the things we developed and go, why the heck did we do it that way? And I think that's really the setup for this, is that we we went, this is how I liken it. The computerization era, this is really what fires this up. And of course, just because I say it doesn't mean to say it's going to be right now, but it is going to be right soon. I do believe that quite heavily on this one. And there's always going to be a few people lying around, like there's a bits of paper lying around, but there's less and less paper, let's be honest. I mean, people go saying, well, there's always going to be paper. Of course, there's always going to be paper. Just because you say there is no paper, you're not really saying you're not going to have a sticky note or some doctor's office is going to be working on some archaic typewriter that's going to send you a piece of paper. That's life. But we're talking holistically and generally and big bang, right? The need for, if you want paper, but in this case, code, is going to die out fundamentally, because if we go back to why we have code in the first place and what we did with it, it's a recognition that we did a really good job in a really poor era, if you like, in the poor era of computing terms compared to what we have today. And so therefore we need to rethink what we do today, not by just saying, oh, well, it's the same, more of the same, more code. And so start with this, the term computerization. It means programming automation to do the work that humans did exactly the way they did it. We have 40 years of legacy shite, right? Pardon my French, but we all made money off it. That literally would take what a human did in a bank or giving an insurance quote or whatever, or anything, and then just went through this process of making it so that the human could be helped or it did it for them, right? And we were limited by, my first program was limited. It had to fit into 30,000 bytes. The file size was limited. So I didn't have this luxury of making it easy to read or understand, or even be able to put comments in it so people could read it. Now, if I could make it small enough, I had the most readable code in the world because my variable names were 30, 40 bytes. They were often descriptive. Although most developers, and I think this is the other issue, is that developers got into computerization and they have computer-like brains rather than business-like brains. And so they code like developers. And there's a big difference between a developer and a programmer. Developers are just a different breed. Programmers or business programmers, or even what we call citizen developers, that they understand the business, that the thing you're trying to solve. And so they're not good coders, right? They're okay, but developers are great coders, but you can't understand what they wrote. So net, the new era, we don't have all the limitations. We don't have to choose a hardware vendor, a software vendor, an operating system, a language. We don't have to choose a database or a UI. We just start building. You and I could open up a business tomorrow, build an application that we can scale out to 10 people or 10 million people in a week. You couldn't do that 10 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So that's my point, is that what if we took a step back and said, well, if we have all the stuff we have today, and I include AI in that, but it's not necessary, with cloud, elasticity, compute power, unlimited storage and bandwidth, you wouldn't build applications the way humans were going to do the work. You would build applications the way computers would have always done it. And it's very different. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. And I love that the distinction between a coder and a developer. Because sometimes people don't really make that distinction. And
a programmer versus a developer, night and day, not only in their charisma, right? I mean, they're difficult to manage. I mean, developers are difficult to manage, but they're very smart people. But you wouldn't necessarily want to have a conversation for an hour at a dinner party.
Yeah, exactly. Do you think that developers are getting pushed out, or just evolution is taking them out? Because let's face it, like you said, a lot of people in the enterprise that, like on the marketing, on the sales side, they don't like developers. They don't like dealing with developers. They don't like having to be kind of held up by developers. Like, you got to pay a ransom if you want to get this software by developer. So is it more a case of the evolution, the natural evolution of, well, all these technologies now baked into the platform, and the things that we used to have to do on our own to get stuff done, we don't even have to do that anymore? Or is it more, we just want to get rid of these folks and we'll use any excuse or reason to do it?
No, it's none of those things, right? So
okay.
Yeah, so the reality is that you've got enterprise applications, which is the stuff that keeps the lights on when you phone to, query a bill, or to pay off your insurance, life insurance, or, to get money back from your pension plans, or to onboard a new customer. They're enterprise applications, and there's tens of thousands of them, right? They just are. Then you've got productivity applications, and then you've got the systems that support everything above. Most of this stuff requires developers to build and do that. But the enterprise applications themselves do not need developers to build it. You can put stuff together using things, you mentioned it, low code, no code, whatever it might be called in the future, right? I call it just don't use code because I don't know what name it's like. Because if you think about it, if you built something without code in some model, and it used to be called model application development, and now I'm going to really show my age because way back even before 88, it was called 4GLs.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
There you go. Okay. The fourth generation languages were the first incarnation of low code, no code. And that term only came about just before RPA in 2012. I think it was, the Forrester guys that came up with that term. Well, no, it was. But 4GLs that kind of died off because the technology wasn't there to support the dream that applications could be built in a model that could be, with like reuse on steroids. That's what 4GL did for you, but you had to, there was so much that had to go on to make that work, and it just didn't compute, not when you had limited computer power, limited memory, et cetera, and it was interpretive, and it just didn't go anywhere. So for the next 40 years, developers had it all. Business would come up with a specification, give it developers, they'd go off and build it. Business would go, that's not what I asked for. Developers go, tough luck. It's too late, right? I mean, that's generically what it is. And then you spend the next 20 to 30 years hacking away at it. Some people call it customization, but I call it hacking because the people who customized it didn't write it, didn't understand what was written, so probably copied it, duplicated it a couple of times, and then modified it some more. And then it just became this legacy spaghetti that nobody really understands, but it's like, well, we can't turn it off because we don't understand it, and there may be risk in turning it off. You wouldn't build applications that way today. You simply wouldn't. There are enough tools on these platforms, on this huge amount of compute power and elasticity we have in the cloud, and the low code, no code vendors. I mean, Pega is an example, but Appian's 25 years old, Pega is 40 years old. They are not standing still. They are moving these technologies, or the very ideal of these technologies, into this new era. So if we can bring and make 4GLs, what was the dream of application enterprise development in the model, and we can bring them forward into this new era, you do not need coders. You don't need developers. You do need coders still that can understand, what if you do this, variability, that. But to just sit there and start coding something, as soon as you code it, it's legacy. Like I always used to joke, anything goes into production 5 minutes later, it's legacy, and you're now paying for it in perpetuity for the rest of your life. And the downside to all of this is IT actually love it. IT, the CTO, the IT team, the developers, they don't want to see the death of code. So that's why you see all these people coming out against it. But they need to hone their skills and focus on the very systems that are going to keep all this stuff running. The AI engines and the operating systems and etc.
Is it they know that kind of the writing's on the wall? I'm talking about like the CTO and their kind of fiefdom of all things tech. Is it because they see the power shift to the CMO and it shifts even more dramatically outside of their realm once these no code, low code platforms take place, and they have professional coders being able to create business applications or let's say applications to fill use cases that cut them completely out of the equation?
Well, they're not completely cut out. I mean, they need to support all of the guardrails, the governance, the compliance, and the security. That's what they should focus on. They should choose a model application development platform, sometimes known as no code, low code, 4GL, whatever it's called, right? And make sure that what's chosen, that's given to business, they can do their job. They've been doing it for decades. Business use Excel. The amount of risk that there is just spreading your code in Excel as well, right? Let's be honest about it. But business turns all these productivity tools and bypass all that security. IT need to step up and make sure everything I've talked about is not without control and governance and security. In fact, if it's done with that, then it's not what I'm talking about at all. You might as well just program it, right? So once we have those platforms that have your backside, if you like, they have all that done. It's just done, and it's continuous thing. If there's new governance or new regulation, those platforms will make sure that's embedded in it. So every one of their customers inherits that in every application they ever built from this day forward. You shouldn't have to have 10,000 organizations that built an application. Suddenly the government comes up with a new piece of governance and control that we get to go get 10,000 sets of developers to go program their hopefully into all this legacy spaghetti. It's just unnecessary.
So if we look at how enterprise applications going forward should be built, because it feels like all this tech is making it easy, but there's still complexity in business. There's still complexity and specifically in certain industries, and that evolves over time, and that calls for new applications to get built at scale to handle the complexity, to handle the integrations, to handle whatever comes along with them. How should they be built, and who should be building them if enterprise application developers kind of go away?
You know what? They're actually only complex because we still think like we're computerizing processes. If you think about the autonomous vehicle, Tesla is the main prime example, right? They didn't take a car and automate it so that it could drive itself. They reimagined the car, right? I don't know if you know this. The steering wheel is drive-by-wire, right? So it's reimagined. There is no rack and pinion, right, in the same sense. It doesn't need that. And if they even tried, it would be a disaster. I've got a car where it can actually control what lane you're in. Do you know how it does it? Bearing in mind, it can't control the steering wheel because it's not. It is the old-fashioned steering wheel with rack and pinion and all that. Is it actually pushes the brakes on the right or the left side to keep it in lane? It's very uncomfortable. Just slightly, the brakes. You don't even feel it, but you feel this jagged. But I've been in the Tesla many times. It's just cruises beautifully. I'm not saying whether autonomous vehicles. Same thing with computerization. What you just talked about is that business changes very quickly, but they're not allowed to change it quickly if you've got all this legacy spaghetti. It's just a fact, proven fact, that the total cost of ownership so ignored, right? IT just say we need $100 billion to support the existing systems. But some new startup comes along, a digital native company, doesn't go and buy those. It doesn't say we need 100 billion to go and start a new bank because we need to go buy all those legacy systems. They start a new bank. And within a year, they're trading credit cards, mortgages, bank, credit, debit, check, all that. And so we have to think like digital natives now within each business segment. And so just imagine, and in fact, I ask people to do it this way. Just imagine that you could build an application without code. I know you can. I've seen it. And so these IT people, business people, CTO, and this comes from the board down. You need to start hacking away at that TCO, that total cost of ownership of all these legacy systems. And some banks have done it by buying digital banks, right? Wow. They just say, screw this. We're not going to take this anymore. They go and buy a digital bank, slowly move customers over to the digital bank, and slowly unwind all that legacy spaghetti. So I know it works. I know you can build applications without code. Nobody could argue with me. I can point almost every example of an application built without code, and it's now accelerating. And I'll tell you why it's accelerating, because of AI. Because AI loves things that are clearly understandable as much as it likes things that are not understandable. A model application development platform gives you a descriptive language of how that application is built and how it runs. It's just this. You could go look at it. You can understand it. It's really easy because it's a model. It's not code, right? Now, AI can generate things to put straight away into that model. I mean, some of these vendors say we can now take a handwritten document and build you an application from it. Now it's not quite there, but all they do is they're not building code from it. They're putting it in their model. So they just interpret what was said. So you and I could describe an application we want in a completely different way, feed it into AI and say we want it to run on Appian, or we want it to run on Pega, or we want it to run on Uncork. Right? It won't matter because as long as it knows those three languages, then job done. Nice. And this all came to me. This is really why I got, old and grumpy, right? Old and grumpy. No, this is what somebody said to me just the end of last year, we're going to use AI to generate code. This is what happened. And they were serious. I'm like, oh my Lord, really? Yes, I used it myself just to test it. I actually got AI to generate a programming language I was using back in the 1980s. And it built a program. It's great. However, I don't want to go and support the program it built. I understood it. So I said to this person, okay, so why don't we have AI generate the most efficient language, which when it runs is about 100 times faster than any other language. They're like, what's that? I went, assembler. Just have AI. Why do you? And they're like, well, no, we want to be able to read it so we can change it. I'm like, there's my point. As soon as you start reading it so that you can change it and hacking at it and copying it and duplicating it and doing all this, so why do you care what AI generates as long as it builds you a working application? Why do you care? And there is no argument to that. So that was my counter. AI generate assembler and up your, so basically, all right, then you really want to do it? And so there's no argument because it is efficient, but it's no good. It's not going to do that. We can use AI to complement things we do. But if we start training people to build in these models, we train AI to build these models for us. We're going to take what we've known. Low code's been around for a long time. It's a growing market. It's big. Low code, no code. But I think what AI does is it has the potential to lift that tenfold in the next 5 years.
So we got a comment here from Dan Aldridge, and he says a gentleman named Paul Coetzer, who's an SAP S/4HANA expert, has speculated that AI will rewrite ERP in the relatively near future. What do you think about that?
I rest my case. But the question is to Dan, do you want it built in assembler? Do you want it built in Data Basic? Do you want it built in C#? Or do you want it to build on a model? And if you don't change it, I don't care. But you will care because you're going to want to be able to understand it and you want to make sure. So these platforms already have this security and guardrails built in. So he's right. You could have AI build anything, right? That's just like, it's eventually going to happen. But build it in a model, it just makes sense. It's a bit like think of it as standards. I mean, we use the model application development, terminology, but it's really standards. There's a standard definition to describe a process, right? Your standard might be different to mine, but we can normalize it with AI. Then you take that and you say, right, who can ingest it? And it may be SAP, it may be Pega, maybe Uncle, maybe Appian, maybe ServiceNow, maybe whatever. But going back to an earlier point that I was making about AI generating code, the other aspect we've got coming out of all of this is that take the driving license validation. It's a process or a task with sub-process within probably every other process known to man in the banking industry and financial industry, right? You need to validate a driving license. I'm guessing there's probably 50,000 versions of the code out there to validate the driving license, right? You would guess. All different versions, some right, some with bugs, some working great, some following every single conformity for every country. But what if we wrote that once in a model? And everybody just consumes it. Why, if you're in IT as a developer, do you care that you've got the best driving license validation program? You shouldn't care. You should focus on the underpinning systems and the security that you need to provide the governance so that if anybody describes what they need, the driving license one is clear. You know what it needs to do in every country. We may. And the advantage then is if we add some new capability, like, we can only take biometrics from your little pinky finger. That's a bad example, but then we could build that in and everybody inherits from it. So across the entire globe, everybody inherits from it. Now, it's got to be understood because it's got to be secure and it can't be, vulnerable, but that's just like everything else. And we've gone that way with the hardware, cloud. We've gone that way with the operating system. When was the last time you said, I wonder what operating system I'm going to run on this piece? Right? You don't. So they've given all this up to the cloud and they've given it all up to the networking protocols and they've given it all up to the operating systems and even, I would argue, the databases. So the last holy grail is give it up for the code. You don't need it in code. You just don't. And if you think you do, come to me because I'll tell you why you don't. I'll have a lovely argument because there is no argument.
Well, but there are arguments. There's going to be pushback. There could be pushback from the IT industry who does not want to see a group of coders basically be out of work. They won't be. We don't have enough coders. Just train them.
That's true.
To do with what to really work on what matters. They're going to go back to coders and developers are similar things, right? Business people don't make great coders anyway. Use the business people to understand the process so they can build it in a model. That model's got to run on something, and that's what we need developers to build. More engines, more integrations.
That makes total sense because as many applications are around, no one enterprise uses just one vendor for everything. There's hundreds and thousands of vendors at some enterprise applications that they're all using, which means there's a huge need for people to do integrations. But people are so afraid of change. People that are used to doing things a certain way and making a certain amount of money for that are not going to be too excited about potentially losing that. And that's not just individual speak. That's, there's certain organizations, there's certain industries that have been built based on, I mean, what do we got? COBOL people. We just talked about 65-year anniversary of COBOL, and there's like 98% of the ATMs are processing transactions with COBOL. There's a lot of stuff out there. The pushback to this new, which means I think pretty disruptive, I'm all for it, but there's a significant amount of people who are totally against it. How do you get to where you want to go with that kind of pushback standing in its way?
So you're always going to get the naysayers if it's their job and their livelihood. I get that. And we as a society have to deal with that across the entire spectrum of humanity, right? Anything, that's disruptive. I think what has to happen is that we have to understand that it happened with cloud overnight. Everybody, I remember 8 years ago talking to a blank. A blank.
Yeah,
I drew a blank. I remember it wasn't that long ago. They said we're never going to go cloud 8 years ago. It was a big bank in Europe. We're never going to go cloud. IT have got our backs. We know how to do this. We'll do it all right. And it's all cloud now. And it's not their cloud. It's one of the big 3 clouds or big 4 clouds, depending upon where you're coming from, right? And the point is they've given that up as well. It's the cost of managing that server room with the coolant systems, the cost of just figuring out what operating system and then hiring the people with the expertise with the operating system expertise. You don't have that anymore. You still have the COBOL stuff, yes, but I actually say, just imagine that process as if you were imagining it today without any history, that you have a legacy. There would be no digital startups if you have to go buy 6,000 legacy systems written in COBOL, would there? Right? So the argument is false. What I would say is that same bank said to me that 95% of their budget was used just to keep the lights on. So it was only 5% left in IT to be disruptive or to enable the business to change. That was the TCO that is so often forgotten. And so the only way this change is going to be forced from the top is not because of people in IT who are betting their careers on the next job 3 years from now, because they will get in your way. This has to come from the board to the CEO, to the executive suite, to make the decision to investigate these products, go play with them, go build something. I'm telling you, you'd be shocked what you can build in weeks and months versus, and do remember, you don't have that big legacy debt now, right? Because these new models have evolved. Some of the old low-code systems were themselves legacy. You couldn't migrate because they were built on the very limits of the technology as well, pre-cloud, data systems and infrastructure and unlimited bandwidth, etc. So when you look at this, it's got to be a top-down thing. And whoever doesn't do it, I promise you, 5 years from now, they'll be the laggards. Their TCO will still be up there in the 90+%. And these other businesses are switching over to this new world, this new era without, and very clear, enterprise applications, processes that keep your business running. Enterprise business processes. Look, ladies and gentlemen, this is not the systems engineering where we need these programmers, we need these developers. And if you do that, whatever product you choose, and you will have multiple products, who cares? You say, well, the trouble is we're beholden to a vendor. There are companies now that can take your lift and shift your system because you're no longer happy with Microsoft and you move it to Google Cloud, or you're no longer happy with Amazon, so you move it to Microsoft, or the price gets out of control. So as long as there's always 3, 4, 5, this monopolistic, idea that, if we were beholden to one low-code vendor, I'm saying make sure you build it in a model. And that model itself should be even higher so that you can shift from one model to the other. But at least build it in one model for now, because that's going to reduce that TCO significantly.
So when you think about the enterprise, how big, the scale, the scope, tens of thousands of employees spread around all over the world, partnerships, ecosystems, when do you see, or how long do you think it'll take for, let's say, a good majority or a good chunk of industry or enterprises actually going this route versus the laggards, the folks who are going to stand their ground for as long as they can and hold out? Because it feels like to me that all you said is so incredibly logical and it makes sense. And I would think a CFO is going to latch on to a lot of that stuff. Say, what, we're going to save how much money? And we can do it like this, and it's simpler, and we don't have to worry about certain aspects of it. Why aren't we doing this today? That's that's one answer. The other answer, and I think the majority is going to be, we don't want to change if we don't have to. Why should we? This is working. You never get fired from buying IBM. That kind of line of thought. How long do you think it'll take to get past that line of thought for a good significant chunk of the company's enterprises? Dare I say the majority of the enterprises?
So I was always a believer in 4GLs, but it was too early before its time. I'm passionate to the nth degree about low code and no code because it works. I've seen it, massive applications across billions of users, right? It works. With AI, it's going to be the booster for the knowledge of it, because people are going around saying we're going to use AI to generate code. I'm like, oh, come on, just stop with this BS.
You hear that a lot, though. I mean,
I know.
Yeah.
And listen, maybe systems. I think that was the question. Is like we could have AI generate a new EIP system. Yes, but build it in a model. You can see the difference. Yeah. If it ends up the model's going to generate code, it's going to run in code. But as soon as you touch that code, as soon as you dip your little toe into, well, let's just change this little. Eventually, I don't know if this is 10, 20 years, AI could understand the changes you've made, and maybe it doesn't matter even at all then. But then if it doesn't matter, why does it need to be code? That's the argument, because code is always going to be the strangulation and the cost of labor, because you're going to have people not only trained in it. I will tell you this. This is one piece, if I leave our audience with nothing else. Developers hate modifying someone else's code. They even hate modifying their own code a year after they built it, because they're just like, they're bored. And most applications built over the last 40 years went like this. We go and hire a team of developers, or they're in-house. They're all excited. They put these teams together. They bring them all the pizzas and sandwiches they need for the next 12 months. Then they get bored. Then some of them move off. Some of them are incentivized with monetary or more pizzas to stay, right? Business is getting frustrated. It's not being delivered on time. CEO comes down and says, you've got to deliver it within 3 months. We've got to roll something out. They rush it. They roll it out regardless. Business aren't happy. Those developers have moved on to something else. You bring more developers in to hack, copy, rinse, repeat, 50 copies of the same subroutine. And then that ends up creating even more legacy mess. And no developer likes touching someone else's code. I have this from experience for the last 40 years. They're fantastic people. They're really smart. I can't do systems engineering. I can program. I can't do systems engineering. Would never want to, although I did write assembler program once. But my point is, it's no argument to this. And so the C-suite has to put their foot down and say, at least try, right? Let us build something. Let us build some of these periphery applications, maybe the priority one. And let's put back into the hands of the business, who before computerization could change their business processes in a week. They could train people. They could tell them that, they had flexibility. Let's put that back into the hands of business so they can build things quickly. They can evolve. You never throw anything away. Nothing ever becomes legacy. It evolves because it's built in the model, right? You may change the process and you don't need that anymore, and you've built another one, or you've extended it and you've enhanced it. And a large portion of processes, I'm going to go out even more now, 80% of processes that run across the entire globe in most businesses, I think, should be the same. Why do you care if your driving license validation program that you've just spent $100,000 or $1 million building and now $1 million over the next 10 years to support? Why do you need your own version of that? You don't. So you're going to see a generic library of reusable assets, I call them actions, where you build things that are not necessary to be different to your competitor. Your IT team is no longer going to be rewarded because their driving license validation or their onboarding program is better than someone else's. Make the difference back to what it was before computing. It's better customer service. It's better service. It's better options for your mortgage. You go back to providing the value to the client that matters. And it's not because you're spending too much on a program, you can't offer something better. And I think that's really where the game change is going to come from. It's already here, Brent. We already have the software. AI is bringing it to life again because AI can poke into the model. And people building using AI to build code is proof of point. You don't need code.
This has been absolutely fascinating. We're going to have to do this again at some point. Maybe we'll do it.
Stirred the pot.
Yeah, and since you're in and out of Atlanta Metro, maybe we should do this face to face, because this has been great. Francis Carden, and right now you CEO, founder of Automation Den, and you say you're also doing some work with HFS.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, and so I'm working with them on a number of projects, and great research firm, great set of people, and it just gives me the ability to sort of like be as flexible as they need me to be, and as flexible as our clients need us to be as well.
This has been awesome. We're probably even going to have to get you on with the great debate, because you should have been a part of that yesterday. That would have been this would have been a fascinating conversation. As you see, my buddy Alan Berkson is saying thanks. Got some good comments from Alan and Don, and of course, the Godfather of RPA. I just love that title, by the way.
That was given, I think, Luke McCormack down in Australia. He gave that to me one year, and in a pub. I think mistakenly called me the grandfather at one point, which we thought was hilarious, like the old guy.
Hey, shout out to Luke, because no, the Godfather of RPA is a fitting title. Once again, Francis Carden, and thank you all for joining us. And 3 p.m. today, come back. We're gonna have another. He's not a Godfather, but he might as well be. Maybe I'll just call him the Godfather of Contact Management.
Why not?
John,
Why not?
Yeah, there's Godfathers all around me, folks. But come back 3 p.m. We're gonna have a great conversation about what's happened since, and what should have happened, I don't know, since he founded Goldmine back in 1989. I will talk to you then. See ya.
Cheers, Brent. See you all.